Welcome, everyone. Welcome, Caitlin. I'm going to do a quick intro and then we can start. So, welcome to our Divergent Discussion. My name is Carla. I'm a registered psychotherapist. I'm a clinical lead at Caboose, and I'm also a PhD researcher. I always need to look at what I'm reading when I'm introducing myself because I feel like I'm going to say it wrong, which is strange. Caboose exists to create belonging, understanding, and support for neurodivergent people. At the heart of what we do are neuronuggets, our short, practical guides that help you understand how your brain works and find ways to make work and life easier. They also help workplaces build genuinely inclusive spaces, which is something that we're going to be speaking about today. This is just a reminder to everyone that the Divergent Discussion is being recorded and will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. We'll also have time at the end of for audience questions. So if you want to just write those down in the chat section, I just want to make sure that everybody can see that. I'm sure that's fine. Then we'll try and make time for all of the questions. So I'll be doing a bio for you, Caitlin. Please stop me if anything sounds incorrect and correct me. So this is Caitlin, an accredited mental health social worker, neurodivergent affirming therapist, which I love, a researcher, and podcast host of Divergent Dialogues. Autistic, ADHD, and part of the LGBTQIA+ community herself, Caitlin brings both lived and professional experience to her work. She specializes in supporting autistic folks and ADHDers through her private practice. Okay, so this word, I've always have an issue saying, the name of your company, cathartic. I cannot
That's
say
all
it.
right.
Can you just say it quickly?
Cathartic collaborations.
Cathartic
Yes. I
collaboration.
love alliteration. So you might notice
The
divergent
CC.
dialogues, cathartic collaboration. Yeah, it's a thing.
Yeah. I know it's actually like a thing with a lot of my autistic friends and clients as well. It's like the double the sounds that kind of like either it rhymes or it's the same sounds. But that word, because it's such a therapeutic word and I have to use it so often, I think my brain is just like, you can't say it. When I read it earlier, I was like, oh, that word, that's like my one kryptonite word. Anyways, okay, so
Sorry.
you're part of CC and is completing a PhD focused on autistic mental health, which is amazing. I definitely want to talk to you about that as well. Caitlin is passionate about social change, tailored therapeutic care, and fostering inclusive, affirming spaces for neurodivergent individuals. Amazing. Welcome. I'm so happy to have
Thank
you.
you. Thank you. And yeah, don't worry about reading the notes. I cannot memorize anything to save my life as an ADHDer, so I totally get that.
Yeah, I need to read it. The other problem is also because of I don't like to call it time blindness because I don't feel like I'm blind to time. I'm just like, I don't see it as important in my life. So I will sit here for 3 hours talking to you about your bio, and then I would completely forget about the questions. So that's why I do need notes.
That's all good.
Yeah. So, okay. So let's start with the first one. So we were talking about, well, I mentioned that we're going to be speaking about neuro-inclusive environments. But when we say performative neuro-inclusion, what are we actually talking about? And why is this so common right now?
So, when we're talking about performative neuroinclusion, we're often talking about the aesthetic inclusion. So, it might look the part, you might go on their website, they might even use some language that sounds somewhat affirming. So, they're very much signaling to others that they're neuroinclusive, but the structures, power, and decision making of the system or the organization remains the same. So it's kind of that facade, that aesthetic piece that it's looking like it, but once you open the door and look beyond that, maybe not so much. So I think, particularly in the last few years, there's been a big drive from a lot of advocates for more awareness of neurodiversity and neurodivergent people and their needs. And I think, unfortunately, some organizations have latched onto that for profit, or there are other organizations where there may be a lot of good intent, but maybe not fully understanding what that looks like either. So it's not always like this nefarious thing that people are trying to do. So I guess performative neuroinclusion is when, the organization might be ready to be more neuroinclusive, but often that involves change. And I mean, I'm an autistic person. Change is hard for me. For some organizations and systems, that can be hard too. So I guess being able to appear neuroinclusive, it can help the organization or the system to feel progressive and feel like they're doing something good, but not necessarily addressing the structural issues or ableism that might be occurring within that system.
And this brings up an important point, right? And I think you touched on it now, is I think personally, and also in my professional career, I've noticed that neurodivergent individuals, especially autistic individuals, notice when it's a facade. Actually, all neurodivergent individuals, I'm saying this as an ADHDer, I pick up on somebody that's fake immediately. And to me, it's like, I can see right through you. And I think it's kind of like a double whammy then, because now it's like, this person is saying that they're neuroaffirmative and we can see through it, but now we're the people pointing it out. So my second question here, which leads into this, is why does performative inclusion often place the burden back on neurodivergent people then?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. When I guess I'm really sensitive to incongruence. So when someone's
Yeah.
looking a certain part or an organization is looking a certain part, but I'm like, hey, what's going on here? And yeah, I agree. A lot of my clients are very sensitive to that as well, and the my neurodivergent friends. So when systems avoid changing, often the neurodivergent person who may be quite attuned to this incongruence, often the burden is put on them to translate themselves, to educate others about neuroinclusion. Perhaps they may feel the need to disclose in order to advocate for some sort of changes, and often they have to accommodate themselves. So, if some organizations may be more, or systems may be more supportive of accommodations, but sometimes it's like you kind of have to sneakily accommodate yourself. And, this can cause a lot of emotional labor on the neurodivergent person, because instead of the organization or the system taking on board their role in learning, it can be put onto the neurodivergent person or people in the organization to help them to understand them. So, they're navigating these systems with additional needs, plus teaching people how to be able to even support them or the clients, the neurodivergent clients that come into the business or the system. So if harm occurs, the responsibility can also shift back onto the neurodivergent person. So if they're going to them for knowledge and insight and then something goes wrong or it doesn't work, then the responsibility shifts back onto them again. So as you can see, there's a lot going on for the neurodivergent person, and a lot of expectations that can be put on them as well.
And if you think about expectations in general, like sometimes, well, a lot of times we know the high percentage of neurodivergent individuals with PDA, so persistent drive for autonomy. And if you're going to tell me it's my responsibility to let people know what my accommodations are, that feels like such a demand. And I would fight against it personally. I would fight against it to now advocate for my accommodations and needs. It brings in so many other things besides the actual point of focusing on, well, let's just make it better for everyone and have a psychologically safe environment.
Yes. Yes, 100%. I'm a pediator as well. So yeah, definitely resonate with that.
Yeah, don't tell me what to do. I'll do the opposite. Yeah, exactly. I'll show you why it's bad not to have an inclusive environment.
Yeah, he's an experiential, piece for you
Exactly.
to learn. Yeah.
I'll write a thesis on this. Okay, we do need to talk about your thesis. Hopefully, we're going to have time for that. But what do you think is the difference between intentional inclusion and
Mm,
impactful inclusion? Because
mm,
this sounds very similar, but
mm.
there's a big difference, right?
Yes. Yeah. And I think that goes back to what I said before, where intentional inclusion is about desire. So people may have really good intentions. They may want to be neuro inclusive, but impactful inclusion is about material outcomes. So intent says, we care about neurodivergent people, and impact says your access has improved in some way. Impact can be measured in retention, as you mentioned, Carla, like psychological safety, participation, influence, and reduced harm. So, I guess when we're in that performative neuro-inclusive space, we might have these good intentions, but there might not be any tangible impact or change actually happening. And often the neurodivergent folks aren't necessarily consulted around that either, whether what's being done to support them is actually landing for them and making an impact for them.
Yeah, I think this brings up a point of the neuro nuggets that we have on Caboose, right? And you're also part of that, which is great. And that's created, it's like the psychoeducational videos that's under 8 minutes long. And it's for employees and employers, and it's created by neurodivergent individuals. And there is a way of showing engagement, showing if it's impactful to the person watching it. So are you feeling like you understand better how to engage with neurodivergent individuals if you're non-neurodivergent or more neurotypical? Or if you're neurodivergent, do you feel like you're understanding your own brain more? So it's that level of, okay, it's making an impact in my life, a positive impact. Hopefully that's the goal. But yeah, I think it's very important to not just say that you want to do something or even bring in a system, but making sure that that system actually works. Yeah, it's so important. There's a big difference between those two things. And like you said, I think most people are good people. I think most people want to be good people too. Not everyone in the world, as we see now with what's going on, but I think most people want to be good. So it's just like, how do you push that further? Okay. What about tokenistic inclusion? How does that affect neurodivergent people emotionally and psychologically? And what is that for people that don't know?
Yeah, so tokenistic neuroinclusion creates this double bind where you may feel visible but not empowered. So an example of that might be that you are provided a position in your organization whereby like you're the informal consultant for neurodivergent needs, but you don't necessarily get any additional pay for that. It's not an official title. There's not like a role clarity around that. So you have permission, I guess, to be able to, I guess, mentor people in that way, but you're not empowered in being able to make an influential change with decisions or, even being reimbursed or compensated for that additional expertise that you're providing. So it can often reinforce internalized narratives of like I'm valued as a symbol, not a person. And I guess that's where the tokenism comes in. It's like, here's the token neurodivergent person in the workplace or, within this project or whatever it is. But, does that neurodivergent person actually feel that there's meaningful role for them that's been integrated within that? So this can often lead to exhaustion, cynicism, withdrawal, and self-blame. So, is it that I'm not doing a good enough job that they don't want to compensate me for my time or integrate this a little bit better within the system? And, I work with a lot of people who are very passionate about their work, but they get super burnt out because everywhere they turn, they're looking for these opportunities, but then it's not, I guess, not facilitated with care.
It's really sad, because I'm seeing this quite often with clients and friends of mine where they are being included, but like you said, they're not actually being kind of rewarded for their time, like compensated for their time, extra time that they're putting in. And as we know, as neurodivergent individuals, we take our work extremely serious, especially when we're super passionate about it. And we want to do a good job because we've got this need to please a lot of times, especially like I'm just doing like different gendered studies, and there are so many different presentations of neurodivergence. And a lot of times we present as, we come across as like this perfectionistic individual, and people see that as a good thing, but it has a lot of strain and drain on the person too. And we might volunteer to do more work, but if that's not being compensated, I mean, that's so unfair. The other thing is also, even if it was compensated, I think there needs to be a better way of also saying to everyone in the organization that it's not okay to work at like, okay, I'm saying this and it's like 10 p.m. on a Sunday now, and this is a once off. Usually I won't work at 10 p.m. on a Sunday. But, it's not okay to work over weekends because we are so eagerly volunteering. So I think it's also important, even if we're getting compensated for it, to have a manager that understands that we are going to always volunteer, to say, look, don't do this now. You'll still get compensated for the work that you're doing extra, but don't do it over weekends. I think that's also important. I don't think we speak about that part enough.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, the person may already have like a full workload or caseload, and then there's these additional duties, but no, their workload hasn't been reduced in order to, to make space and time for that. So, yeah, exactly. When do people have the time to do these things? It might be
Yeah.
additional hours. Yeah.
Okay. And what about the harm that is done when neurodivergent voices are consulted but not listened to? You touched on it with when we're getting burnt out, but I mean, that's a big one.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think it can open this door for people that perhaps they haven't felt much belonging, or there hasn't been an open door for them to be able to share some of their lived experience knowledge. So people can get really excited because, like, oh, yes, like here's this opportunity for me. But often it's not clearly defined. And, when we share our lived experience, it can be from a really vulnerable place. Like, this is hard earned knowledge. We've had to go through a lot of struggles in order to learn a lot of these things. And when we open ourselves up to that, and then there is no change that comes from that, it can be really frustrating because we're hoping to, I guess, put ourselves out there so that it will shape change, and then it's really disappointing because it's like, okay, well, I put myself out there and now, there hasn't been any tangible change. And yeah, this can be really re-traumatizing for people, and it can erode their trust. They're kind of doing this stuff in good faith, hoping that, their team or their organization or the system is going to take them seriously and support them. But yeah, when it goes nowhere. And I think, like, at the end of the day, obviously it's not always practical to be able to implement everything, but there at least needs to be a discussion around why, kind of closing the loop for that person. Just bringing someone in to consult and then leaving them in the dark, as you can imagine, it's confusing and disorientating.
Yeah, and you touched on something there. I mean, everything that you said is really important, but the first part I felt quite like it hit me when you said it was a sense of belonging that we crave. Like I remember since I was young, I really felt out of place. I always felt like I didn't really belong at school. I had many friends, but I always thought, okay, don't say that. Don't say what you're thinking, just laugh at the joke and make funny comments and so on, just kind of fit in. And it's sad because now I really do have a sense of belonging, but it's usually with most of my neurodivergent friends. I mean, like I don't see there's a big difference between neurodivergent versus non-neurodivergent. I don't see it like that. But I do tend to feel more comfortable with people that are also comfortable in just being exactly who they are, whatever divergence that might be. But I think at work, especially when you don't know the person and your colleagues so well, because it's a different environment, we're not as open. I think it's difficult to find the person that you can trust, and we need a person that we can trust in any environment. That's
Yeah,
what makes us or gives us that psychological safety. So
100%.
that's quite sad, the belonging that we see and we want and we crave, and then when we have it, it's kind of like, okay, well, whatever you said in this safety area isn't going to be implemented.
Yes, exactly.
And how do power dynamics show up in inclusive initiatives?
So it's really about the scaffolding and structures. And I think this is where things become a little bit undone is, as I was saying before, it's like, okay, we'll get someone to come in and consult, and then like that's ticking the box for neuroinclusion and we're all set. Um, but I think it's really important to consider that input from the start. So who's setting the agenda? Who's setting the goals? Who controls the funding? Who decides what is or isn't reasonable? So inclusion is about shared power, because without that shared power, there is still that power imbalance and sometimes dominance. So it's not just about having a neurodivergent person's perspective as an add-on, it's actually integrating that throughout the process or the system.
Yeah, I think that's important in every system that we create, that we actually need to have the lived experiences in there. I think that's definitely okay. I'm gonna go over to your PhD now. I'm so sorry. But that's like my PhD is focusing on bringing academia and lived experiences together, which I think is just like, why are we not doing this more often? Where
Yes.
like academic writing to me, I get so bored when I read journal articles. I love the results section. But just reading the whole thing, I'm like, you can write this so much better and we would actually be interested. You can just the language that you're using. And then also asking actual neurodivergent, because mine's focusing on women specifically. What's your experience? Like what are you going through? Like what do you experience? Not the DSM, not the symptoms. But okay, so what about you? What are you focusing on after?
Well, funnily enough, yeah, we might have to chat after, because one of my other passions, I've many, is about, yeah, making academia more neuro-inclusive and
No,
including how journal articles are presented. So one of my goals is to write as many odd journal articles as possible and get them try and get them published. But anyway, that's a whole other thing. I'll go
nice.
down a tangent. But yeah, my PhD is relevant in the sense that I will be using a participatory approach to my research and talking about good intentions and all this sort of thing. Like doing a PhD, structurally in the process, there are still restrictions as a PhD, because you're like a researcher in training, right? So for example, I am going to have an advisory board, which actually I am recruiting for at the moment. But in order to be able to advertise or even start the human facing side of my PhD, I had to go through a lot of hoops. I had to go through ethics. Even if I wanted to have people involved from the very start, I couldn't, because of how a PhD is set up. And there's a lot of good reasons for that, because obviously they don't want to be unleashing PhD students onto
Mm,
people and potentially doing harm. So I'm not, I'm saying I can understand why, but if we are going to have true participatory approaches, particularly for PhD students, that might require, some additional considerations or some flexibility, or maybe a different way of going about things, having different processes.
mm.
So yeah, I think that's a good example where, sometimes the way the system or the process is set up, when we have good intentions, it might not support that.
Yeah, this is actually a really good point because the hoops that you have to jump through with ethics takes way longer than the actual work that we're doing and the questionnaires and the engagement with people, getting the info that we and the data that we need to write the things up in a better way. Yeah, it's ridiculous actually. I think there's a lot to do in academia that we can help with. But I think you're on the right track and I'm trying to be there too. So we should definitely chat more. Okay, back to the questions. So, why are we okay? So, representation without decision making. Why is representation without decision making power not enough in the current state?
Yeah. So I'm trying to reel my brain back, because we went down like a special
Sorry,
interest. I was like, okay,
sorry, come
bring it back,
back,
bring it
come
back,
back.
bring it back. That's all good. So yeah, so as I was saying before, representation can coexist with oppression. So we can have neurodivergent people within the decision making space as well, but it doesn't mean that there aren't factors that are impacting on them within that process. Like, you were saying, Carla, is this a psychologically safe place? Is this a psychologically safe process for this person? And decision-making power determines who shapes the systems, really. You can consult, you can provide your lived experience. Time and time again, a lot of people do provide that to, government or organizations or systems. And then when it gets to the decision-making, rubber stamp of yes, it's a no. And there isn't necessarily any sort of discussion around why. So without power, representation can become quite decorative, and a lot of neurodivergent people become quite jaded and want to disengage from that process because time and time again they're putting their, their hearts, their passion on the line, but then they're not seeing those tangible change and results.
Do you know what it sounds to me? I love analogies because it makes sense in my mind. So sometimes because of my inattentiveness, I sometimes drift off when somebody talks, right? So I have to like make analogies to keep me in the moment. So while you were talking, I was thinking about like a Christmas tree that we're just decorating with all the trees and with all the lights and fairy lights and everything and all the presents around. But we're forgetting that we're celebrating like being there with each other. We have all the decorations because you said decorative and I was like, oh, Christmas. Because we forget that we're actually there to spend time with the other person. It
Yes.
doesn't matter if you're religious, I'm not religious, but it's like spending time with family members or whoever, friends or whatever. We forget that.
Yeah.
We're just like, how many presents are we getting? And is it decorative enough? And it's
Yeah.
just, we're forgetting what the actual point is for true inclusion,
Yes.
including everybody and not making them feel like you're so special. That's why we're doing this. That's also
Yeah.
another thing that I really dislike.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess it's like, yes, these are neurodivergent folks. They're human. Like, let's
That's right.
have a relational approach to these things. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And we can all learn from one another. Like it's not like we're needing to be accommodated and then we're going to be okay or normal. I'm never going to be normal, but I want to be accommodated, but also my accommodations is going to help you and the other person. It's really like a quiet environment for me is great. And it might actually help so many other people to be more productive and focus on the task at hand. Okay, so what are some signs an organization is being performative rather than genuinely inclusive? I know we've spoken about this, but if you can like pinpoint some things
Yes.
out that's like a little bit of a red flag or green
Yeah, of
flags.
course. Yeah. So they may have a heavy focus on aware. Oh my goodness. Sorry. My throat is doing funny things.
That's because asked you about your special
I
interest.
need to do
You're
some
like,
like,
I want
I
to
need
talk
to
about.
talk about it. Yeah. It's like,
You're like, let's go back there.
so there can be a heavy focus on awareness training, but little policy change. So, it might be the like disability, like neurodiversity awareness week or whatever. So they get up all the neurodivergent folk to do like a training or a presentation, but there hasn't been any environmental or structural change. There may be a lot of, celebration posts. So that might be in newsletters or on social media. But again, there might not be any funding or accessibility budgets for lived experience input or consultation or even like, for some of these presentations. Sometimes, unfortunately, people get asked to present, without any sort of compensation as well. So another thing is when they keep asking for feedback. So that might be from people internally, or that might be from clients and stakeholders, but they're not actually doing anything with that feedback. It's just kind of sitting on the shelf. There's been no sort of tangible change. Also, if there is a lot of reliance on like one neurodivergent staff member as like the kind of the expert in the organization or like within the team as well. So again, it's kind of these little add-ons as opposed to that deeper environmental and structural change. So it's that sort of the aesthetic of, look, we're doing the right thing, and there might be good intention, but they're not doing the the other way, which it takes longer, it takes more effort, it takes more time, but it's enduring and it can be generally more supportive for neurodivergent folks.
Yeah, and also another one that you mentioned here was, you get the spokesperson of this is the neurodivergent individual that's speaking, and I'm quite assertive, I guess, but I am a specific type of neurodivergence. And then, you get like my best friend who is very soft spoken and she doesn't want a lot of feedback. She wants only written feedback. She's very different to me, which is important to note that there are so many different types of neurodivergence, and we're all just, like you said, people. So we're going to have our own preferences, and it would be nice to have different choices and options and not just, the assertive Carla said that this is neurodivergent friendly, so we've got our stamp of approval. It is important.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to consider diversity other than just neurodivergence as well. So people of differing cultural backgrounds, those from the queer community as well. Like, as you said, I know a lot of neurodivergent people, and no one of us is exactly the same. Even when we have diagnostically similar neurotypes, that still shows up and presents really differently for each of us.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, also just like the preferences, like preferences of working from home, working at the office or hybrid, like all of these things. It can just be a personal preference, but sometimes it's really influencing our energy levels when we don't have the option to work from home or vice versa. Okay. What allows organizations to receive feedback about their inclusion efforts in a way that leads to accountability and not defensiveness?
Yeah, so this is a tricky one because, if we are strongly leaning into the justice sensitivity,
Mm,
and I mean, I'm a social worker, so, I think that kind of lends to that. Also autistic, which kind of lends to that as well. So, sometimes we can feel really passionate about things, particularly when there has been harm and we really feel the need to take action or for action to be taken. And, part of my work is advocacy, particularly as a social worker. There's been times where I've had to advocate with my clients. And I guess there's a few different things that I've found can be more effective when, trying to provide feedback to exert some sort of change. So sometimes it can be helpful to frame the feedback around the patterns and the structures and not individual fault. So, for example, if we go to our manager and we go, "You're not doing this, you're not doing this, you're not doing that, this needs to change." I mean, those things might be true, but for that individual, they might be quite defensive of that. And the other thing to consider is that we don't always understand the limitations of their role or the limitations of their decision-making power as well. So going to them instead and being like, "Hey, like I've noticed this thing that's been going on in our workplace. There's myself, maybe a few other colleagues that are having this struggle here. What do you think we could do together?" Or like, what sort of avenues are there for change here? So you're still letting them know about what's going on, but you're not assigning any blame. It's more like, here's a pattern, here's this structure, here's this policy. I'm not really sure that it's working for us. Is there any flexibility there, or can we look at this? So it's really important to separate intent from impact and also describe observable outcomes. So again, I personally believe majority of people, they have a good intent, but that doesn't always follow through to impact. So, we want to be asking for some sort of tangible indication that something has been done or will be done. And it can also be, this is a great one, it can be really helpful to link it to organizational or system goals, values, or risks, and name possible repair. So particularly if there's a risk, like a lot of organizations or systems can be quite risk averse. So if we're highlighting that, saying, "Hey, there's this thing going on here, I'm really concerned that XYZ could happen," that can be a way to advocate. Or go, "Hey, like these are the values that we're saying that we uphold as an organization. This thing that's going on over here, it's actually not, kind of supporting that." So really helping to connect those dots for them, but also sometimes providing like some sort of solution, but not trying to necessarily blame or push a particular outcome as well. So yeah, so that's a bit broad, but that's a few little tips and tricks of what I found can be helpful.
Yeah, I really like those tips and tricks. I feel like sometimes it could be exhausting because
Yeah.
then it's again on us to
Cool.
connect those dots. I think it's a good way if you have the capacity. If you feel like, okay, I can go through like what the values are saying and then connect it with what I'm needing in the
Yeah.
moment. Other times, maybe just refer them to somebody like you, somebody like you on the on the neuro nuggets. They can watch
Yeah.
you on there, and there's a way for them to understand, like the managers to understand, okay, this is what the person needs, or this is what they're trying to communicate to me. people
Yeah.
do get defensive. I get defensive when I feel like somebody is saying that I did something wrong. I'm just human. We're all human. We want to be right, which sometimes is difficult then for communication. And a good leader needs to listen, but we're all just human. So I do understand that where if you go to somebody and say, look, you made me feel like da da da, the person might think, okay, well, I need to defend myself here because I don't want to be sued or whatever, or what the next step could be. But like you said, if you say, look, the values in the organization says this, and this is how I'm feeling, and it's incongruent, that could be
Yes.
really nice. Yeah, it's a tricky one because I am quite straight up, and I think sometimes people see that as being rude, but it's just me saying what I'm noticing.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. I mean, obviously I'm a social worker. I've spent many years learning how to advocate and have experience in advocating for myself and for the people that I work with. And I think it's really important to note that you don't have a responsibility to advocate. And you don't necessarily have the bandwidth to advocate for everything, and that's okay. It doesn't mean that you're not doing your part, or that you're not a good enough advocate, or anything like that. Like we all have our own unique needs, and often we are quite prone to burnout. So sometimes we can't take on everything. And yeah, you're right, there might be particular organizations, or there might be mechanisms within the system or your organization where you can get additional support, so you're not just having to have those discussions by yourself, or even problem solve. They might be able to help you to problem solve, to offer some of those solutions as well. So it's not all on you either. But yeah, I guess it can be helpful. It can feel empowering to have tools in order to do that if we wish. But if we don't, or we can't, there can be other avenues as well to advocate that isn't necessarily us going into that meeting room and having those discussions.
Yeah, and even like you said now, like even like you kind of lean towards brainstorming with another person, right? So even if you have a person that you trust, because I think that's so important. Ever since I've started trusting people in my life, which took many, many years, and it's only a few, I could bounce my ideas off them and I say, look, this is what I want to tell the person. Like if it's a partner, a friend, employee, or whatever it is, employer, how does this sound like? Like, how does this come across? I mean, that makes a massive difference because the person would say, that's a bit rude, like, that's a bit too straight up, or no, it's not straight up enough. Sometimes, we hear it very different in our brain to what it sounds like out in the wild.
Yes. People have various feelings about AI. I
You
quite
do
enjoy
chat
AI,
GPT.
and I will have a little chat. I do chat with my wife, and I do chat with my friends, but
Yeah,
it's nice to have a little quick back and
yeah, yeah.
forth with
Check in.
ChatGPT, see what's going on here. How can
Yeah,
I express this in a way that's going to be received well by the other person? So yeah,
yeah.
that's another way.
Look, I used to be a big advocate for this, but my ex used it a lot, like in our arguments. And then I would just hear, like, it's not this, it's this. And I'm like, oh, he's ChatGPTing me.
No, I don't do that. It's just to bounce it around.
Okay.
I use my own thoughts to have the
Okay.
conversation.
That's important. Yeah, because I've obviously got a bit of trauma like there, which I
Yeah.
need to get over. But anyways, okay. So what does a respectful ethical partnership with people who have lived experience actually look like in practice? That's a
Yes.
nice question.
Yes, yes, yes. So often it can be paid involvement. People are taking time out of their day where they could be doing other things or having other employment. So, and also like lived experience that is legitimate knowledge that, not everyone has that. And, that's something that should be compensated for, certainly. And as I said before, having early involvement with a neurodivergent person within, the project or whatever it is, because I guess if they're there from the start, there's going to be an influence from the start. Whereas if they're coming in at some point, then it's like this sort of optional add-on, and that might not, integrate as well once there's been certain decisions made or things put in place. I think acknowledgement of contribution is really important as well. So, it's like this person was actually part of creating this, or, just acknowledging that they did consult, on the project or whatever it is. And I think what's really important and something that's come up throughout this discussion is that it is about an ongoing relationship, not just this one-off thing where it's like, okay, you're the neurodivergent person who's coming here, we're having a little hour discussion and see you later. Like, it's about having ongoing relationship, not just with individuals, but also with the communities in which you want to draw that knowledge from as well. So, um, and I guess like when there is that ongoing relationship, there is more of that psychological safety as well. So you never know, you might even get, even more insights into neurodivergent folks' lives.
I would add there the boundaries from the other side, like also to say that, like what we said earlier, is to make sure that you're not just kind of like tapping resources because we're giving it so freely, right? Like we're just like, yes, and this is how I think, and this is what could make it better, and this and this and this. And even if I was compensated for my time, I would still say, okay, let me go and find more research for you. Let me go and do this for you, and I'll send you through this. Whereas the other person also has a bit of a responsibility there to say, no, that's okay. You've done enough for now. Like, I think that's important because it's also gauging that they, us, we, I need a bit of boundaries to say, look, you don't have to do all of this. We're just so eager. I find that something that isn't pushed enough to say that we need to stop as well. We need to take time off. It's okay to say no. That's a big thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it comes back to, usually if someone is coming in, even if it is for a consultation or a piece of work, there is a scope involved. So, it might be like, okay, here's the brief, here's the scope of the work. But I find often with neurodivergent consultation, there isn't any scaffold or boundaries put in place. It's like, oh, come for a meeting and we'll ask you some questions and, we'll kind of see what comes up. But again, that's kind of saying it's a bit of this afterthought. It hasn't been meaningfully integrated into the project or what the organization or system's trying to achieve.
Yeah, that's a nice way of putting it. There needs to be a scope. There needs to be like a limit. Okay, if an organization realizes that they've been tokenistic, what's the first step towards repairing the trust?
Yeah, I think this is a hard one for a lot of
all of these questions are hard. I'm so happy that you didn't ask me these.
No, it's all right. Yeah, it's tricky. So, I mean, look, I can't speak for every neurodivergent person, but for me personally, and from the collective of people that I have sort of interacted with that are neurodivergent, I think it's really important to take clear responsibility, like to acknowledge that.
Does that happen still in today's
Sorry,
world?
what was that?
Do people still take accountability in today's world? Does that happen?
Well, I would like for it to. I think it's really important.
Me too.
I think, I mean, yeah, I think accountability is the first step because I think if you're taking that accountability, sometimes the defenses of the community that you've done harm to, like there might be like a little bit of okay, there's been some acknowledgement here, like it doesn't change what happened, but at least there's some accountability being taken here. And naming that harm openly and saying, look, this is what we've done, but not just stopping there. Also, this is what we're going to do about it. This is how we're going to repair. This is, we've identified this gap. We've identified that this isn't okay. And, we can see that perhaps we did have a good intention, but that impact hasn't landed. So I think, like, I've seen this a few times where, perhaps someone like an organization has posted something online and, whatever the messaging or the language they used was not affirming. And, I've seen people that have just deleted it. I've seen people that have been defensive. And then I've seen people who have done a post or commented and said, hey, I'm really sorry. I've done a little bit of learning about this and now I understand that what I said or did or whatever was not okay. And this is what I'm going to do in future. And I think that opens the door for repair. Whereas if we just go, no, put our head in the sand or not do anything, it's like, okay, well, there's harm and hurt here, but you can't close the loop because it's been put out there, but there's been no repair. And I think it's really important to treat accountability as ongoing as well. So it's not like a one-off apology, as trust is rebuilt through consistent change over time. So again, it's not just oh, whoops, we did this. It's also, okay, well, we've committed to these changes to make repair and we're going to continue with that moving forward.
I really like that. I mean, the reason why I said that about the accountability was because I usually see people that are neurodivergent that takes a lot of accountability. I've screwed up so many times in my my career. So many times that I've said something wrong and I said, look, sorry, I should have learned this by now. Like I've been in this field for 21 years and I still do it. My clients are wonderful. So they help me out a lot with terms and things that have evolved, like how we understand therapeutic modalities and people's neurodivergence, everything. But I don't see it as often as like the accountability being taken by bigger organizations. And I think
Mm.
it is probably a fear of being, I don't know, sued or whatever, like being put under or being canceled, because that does happen a lot. I think if we're just a bit more humane and just like a bit more real and say, you know what, I did screw up and I'm sorry,
Yeah.
really wasn't my intention, then we would
Yeah.
see, okay, this person is a good person. They're learning, they're evolving, and we're
Yeah.
all learning and evolving. I mean, that's going to be a never ending process, hopefully, because it makes it life exciting. But yeah,
Yes.
I definitely think we can learn from saying sorry and moving on in all the different fields. Okay, before I go down that rabbit hole, because I'm obviously wanting to go into politics and I'm going to pull myself away from that and stick to the questions. I'm not
That's
going
tempting.
down there. Not today. Okay, so we've got a couple more questions. If there's any questions from the audience, please do add them. Otherwise, I will continue speaking about our special interest at the end. So what about neurodivergent people? Like what can we look for when deciding whether a space is actually safe and inclusive? Are there things that we can spot and say this is a good thing, that's not, we need to be careful
Yes.
of that?
Yes. So I think number one is, are accommodations normalized? Like, is that just kind of, this is just what we do here. This is just, if you work here, if you move through this space, this is just what is here, what is offered. Or is it something that's considered special, like an add-on, like you have to, ask special permission or request for these sorts of accommodations. So again, if it's just naturally integrated within, the environment or the system, then that's great. It's because again, that takes the burden off the neurodivergent person having to name needs or advocate. I think something else, and this speaks a lot to the psychological safety that you've been talking about, Carla, is what happens when someone raises a concern. So, as we said, people don't always get it right, even when they have good intentions. But when someone raises a concern, is that met with defensiveness or is that met with accountability and action? So that's something that is an indicator. And I guess lastly, like, is difference treated as information or inconvenience? So, often we live in this world that likes to maintain this neuronormative way of functioning. And I think there's a lot more understanding of that diversity now. So is it like, okay, like there's some difference and diversity here, we might need to consider doing things a little bit differently or offering options? Or is it, oh, that doesn't fit in with the existing status quo. No, sorry, I'm not going to listen to that, or we're not going to consider that, or we're not going to integrate that. So yeah, I guess there are a few things that
Yeah.
people can look for.
Yeah, I really like the options. I think we spoke about it earlier, but it's so different for different people. Like, are the options being added to the system? So
Yeah.
if I say like, look, this is something that I really prefer because it helps me to focus, is it something that other people can also choose? Or is this now specifically for me and
Yes.
that's it because I spoke up? That's what I
Yes.
think is so important, is like you get like the assertive individuals that are more outspoken, but is that then open for everyone? And do they also, like I said, my best friend's very quiet. Does she have a way of asking for those accommodations in a way that's not like putting her hand up at a meeting, because she was not going to do that? So does she feel safe to email somebody, or is there a way to email somebody anonymously? So I think all
Yeah.
of those things are really important. Um, I remember walking into a very neuro-inclusive organization once, and I felt so at home because there were so many different rooms, and you could see like that's the ADHD room, that's the autistic room, that's the ADHD room, that's the OCD room, that's the anxiety room. Like it was just so perfect because you could see like you can go anywhere and you would feel safe in, parts of you, or yeah, part of me felt safe in one room and a part of me felt safe in another room. So I could kind of like go around as I also go around my personality. So with my more ADHD side, I wanted to go into the ping pong room. I was like, yeah, I can beat everybody in ping pong. But then I would get overstimulated. So I would want to go into the sensory room. I really wanted to work there, but it was completely out of my field. So I need to study that next. Okay, what about, I've got two more questions for you. Is there a role for self-advocacy? We've been speaking about it a lot, but if we suspect there is performative inclusion.
Yes, I think there is. But as we mentioned before, there has to be safety. So if you're not feeling safe, then it probably isn't best to proceed. You may need to get other people on board for support, or you might need to engage, with the mechanisms within the organization or sometimes outside. Maybe there's advocacy organizations that can support that. Like you don't have to put yourself out on the line. There might be other ways to go about that where, you have that support and protection. As I said before, self-advocacy should never be mandatory. So it's not something you have to do. There can be times and opportunities where it can feel quite empowering to be able to do that. And sometimes we can affect change for ourselves and others. But again, like number one priority is our safety. The other thing to consider is that, I think especially the last few years, there's been a lot of neurodivergent people coming together collectively for change as well. So, if there's a lot of themes that keep popping up for you that you're feeling really frustrated by, but you're, maybe not feeling the safety to be able to self-advocate, it might be worth having a little Google online and seeing if there's, other groups out there that are doing some work on this. They might be able to give you some ideas and some support. And often when we have more voices saying the same thing, like there is often more power in that as well. So there's that protective piece where we're not alone, but also that kind of chorus of people saying the same thing. It does, carry some weight as well.
Yeah, I think we also share quite a few resources in some of the groups on Caboose. And I think like those resources are really nice to bring into meetings, even not just the neuro nuggets if that's not your way of learning, but there are like, PDFs that you can use and you can share with some of the people that you work with. Let's end on something hopeful. What gives you hope? So,
What gives
something
me
that
hope?
gives you hope when it comes to the future of neuroinclusion.
The thing that came to mind was cats, but yeah, that's not actually my answer, but cats.
I love
Um,
cats.
I've seen so much amazing work pop up from, particularly neurodivergent led organizations that are really setting a new standard and a new norm. I also really love, as a social worker, I really love these kind of grassroots communities that kind of popping up, whether that's for advocacy or other things, just like neurodivergent people just banding together, over their passions as well. I think generally, speaking of cat, that's my cat. Speaking of, the other thing that I've noticed is that as we have the younger generation of people come through, they're setting a lot more expectations at a baseline for neuroinclusion, for accommodations. It's not this bonus thing that we have to jump through hoops for. It's just like, okay, well, this just needs to be, the standard of, that people receive when coming into these organizations and systems. I've also noticed that, over the last few years, there's been a big emphasis on awareness, but now there's more of this focus on design or implementation or taking action as well. Like I think a lot of neurodivergent people are like, okay, we've done the awareness thing. Now, what are you going to do about this? So I think moving into that space feels really exciting. Because I think, I can just see all these things popping up and hopefully just things are going to get better and better for us moving forward.
I think so too. I think like the youth is amazing. I think we're bringing in people that are advocating for their own needs, but also for others. I think it's more of an empathic, it's kind of like empathy and action approach
Yes.
because we're speaking up. I mean, even I'm saying we as if I'm very youthful, but I'll stay youthful for the rest of my life. But we have a seminar coming up at my university, actually, Católica, this Friday, and it's called Diversity and Thought. And it is about bringing in lived experiences. And one of the speakers has got ADHD and she's a therapist, and I'm there. And it is happening more and more, even in academia, that you're seeing, neurodivergent people speaking up and saying, look, it's not just about awareness, but look, these are the articles that we've published in a graphic novel so that it's way cooler.
Yeah.
Now everybody reads it, not just like the 5 people that reads journal articles. Anyways, Caitlin, I can speak to you for hours, but I'm actually sticking to time very nicely today, which is remarkable because I never do. But I just want to thank you for your time and all your insights and knowing the answers to all these very difficult questions. So well done. Because if you
As I
asked me
said,
those,
hard one. Sorry?
no, if you asked me those questions, I would just be like, what do you mean?
Well, it's hard won knowledge, I think, yeah, like a lot of my journey I spent not knowing that I was autistic ADHD. So, yeah, it's nice to kind of have this full circle moment where I can take a lot of these challenges that I've been through in my life and being able to provide insights to hopefully, support some sort of positive change for others.
Yeah, I think you're definitely doing that. So yeah, definitely check out Caitlin's Neuro Nuggets on Caboose because I love those and I love the way that you just speak in general. It's so eloquent. I'm gonna
Oh,
bank some of the vocab that you use, some of the words. I'm gonna have to go back and re-listen to it though because I can't remember the big words now. I love big words, but I always forget them. Anyway, so just a reminder to our audience that we have a range of divergent discussions up. You can find all the details on the Caboose as well as our newly launched Neuro Nuggets. Neuro Nuggets are short, practical guides that help you understand how your brain works and find ways to make work and life easier. They are also for workplace to help create more inclusive spaces created by neurodivergent people with lived experience. Caitlin has a few series, like I said, in the app that they're definitely worth looking at. And thank you everybody for joining. We didn't get any questions, but hopefully we will when we launch this video on YouTube, and then we'll check in there. Thank
yeah.
you, Caitlin.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone.